what ensued was the War of the Successors, or the War of the Diadochi. And we had these African lands basically taken over by the Greeks. So eventually Rome would come into power, and then Rome would basically seemingly defeat the Greeks. But we're going to get into this. It's a deep stuff to this. But yeah, and they come into power. But we have to look at what happens next, because again, talk about this, how Rome had their civilization, their customs set up the way that they wanted them, and they completely started to adopt the Greek mythologies and culture and custom Hellenization. They continued it in those territories, and we see Heracles change from Heracles to Hercules, and we see this whole adoption of Greek mythology and Roman mythology. So a lot of people don't know when this change happened, but it happened during this time. But we can find, a lot of these Roman mythological figures before the conquest of the Greeks, which shows they had some type of interaction with each other. And the issue with all this is it should be obviously clear. One, we don't have the original Septuagint. We can't prove the story of LXX is true, because LXX has been since proven to be a Jewish forgery. And I talked about Hecataeus and how all the information on the ancient Jews is pseudo. Nobody has any real information on them, as if they didn't exist. We have these facts. We have the fact that when you go back and look at ancient Greek mythology, we find biblical stories, which I'm going to show you even deeper in this video. So this history, if you was to go back and find information before biblical religion that's basically showing it existed before biblical religion, it would change your mind about the Bible, right? So anybody who does their research, you have found it. You have went out and you have found clear, concrete information that shows the biblical stories in the Bible must have come from the Greeks. Had to, because this stuff is before. Now, if you want to believe the Bible and believe Moses and the Levites, and he wrote this whole Torah out, and it was an oral Torah, and they had all this information, and that the biblical stories happened before Greek mythology, we can't prove none of this, then you will believe that the Greeks copied from, real life, because there was no Bible yet. So this stuff can be, 1000 BCE, and there was a Bible for them to get this information. They're in two different locations. There's no way they should know what they know unless it's what happened to them. So then you have a decision to make. Do you believe the Greeks or do you believe the Bible? More information and proof supports the Greeks than the Bible. So we talked about the Garden of Hesperides story, and anybody who's looked into this story can clearly see that this is where the Garden of Eden story must have come from. It's very similar to the Garden of Eden story. And again, as I said, most people look at it and say, well, the Garden of Eden story is, first, but we can't prove that it's first if we're going to go into mythology or biblical history and take that as fact, then it's first. But in proven history, in this real world, there is nothing biblical that predates the story. So in the Garden of Hesperides story, for those of you who have looked, we see you have the serpent in the tree, you have the apples of immortality, you have the story with Heracles, which would be Hercules, and Noah is also in this story, by a different name, which we'll get into in a second. But the biggest part is understanding that, yeah, this story, the Garden of Hesperides, begins with two people, and we have Zeus and Hera. So it says here, Zeus and Hera, the first couple according to the Greeks, seated together on the east frieze of the Parthenon from about 435 BC. The Judeo-Christian tradition considers Adam as the father of all humanity. The term Father Zeus is a description of the king of the gods that appears over 100 times in the ancient writings of Homer. According to the ancient poet Hesiod, Zeus is the father of God's men, the gods being deified ancestors. Genesis 3:20 describes Eve as the mother of all the living. In a hymn of invocation, the 6th century BC lyric poet Alcaeus refers to Hera as mother of all. As the first wife, the Greeks worshipped Hera as the goddess of marriage. As the first mother, the Greeks worshipped her as the goddess of childbirth. Both the Judeo-Christian traditions and the Greek religious tradition insist that their respective first couples came out of an ancient paradise with a serpent-entwined fruit tree. Two opposite spiritual standpoints, the former looking to the Creator as the source of truth, and the latter looking to the serpent for it, share the same factual basis. Again, this is something you're going to see because people are very careful about what they say that's in the professional field, especially pertaining to history. So they don't want to risk their credentials. They don't want to risk their position, their jobs, or what have you, saying the wrong thing that's going to offend people in power. So everybody know, don't say nothing about the Jews, don't say nothing pertaining to them, but you still got a job to do. So it's clear as day, they know, anybody that's a real researcher understands that clearly this, story is first. This Greek story comes before the Adam and Eve story, and we don't have anything that's concrete that, shows that it came, before the Garden of Hesperides. Now, we know that this stuff is older. We have the pottery. A lot of these stories, we have Homer's Odyssey and Iliad, of course, but we still have a lot of ancient Greek artifacts because the civilization still stands, still exists. So the pottery is in museums. They still find this stuff to this day. These stories were put on pottery. When we find them, you've seen them. So it says here, ancient Greek vase artists painted images of biblical figures, Noah and Nimrod, over 2,000 years ago. And Nimrod, as you will understand, will be Heracles or Hercules, same person. The book of Genesis describes human history. Ancient Greek religious art depicts human history. While their viewpoints are opposite, the recounted events and characters match each other in convincing detail. This brief article focuses on how Greek religious art portrayed Noah and how it portrayed Nimrod and his successful rebellion against Noah's authority. So understanding, wait a minute, how is it that we have the story of Noah? You'll see the different name, Noah, in Greek mythology. How is this possible? So in this story, it's a post-flood story where you basically have Heracles or Hercules trying to gain back, the planet for the mortals, trying to gain it back. And he's trying to get the apples of immortality to do so. So it says here, Heracles goes for the apples. The seated man on the vase to our right of the tree is Nimrod/Heracles. The goal of Nimrod/Heracles in the post-flood world was to push Noah and his God out of the picture, dispatch those who disagree with his own mankind exalting rule, and get back to the ancient garden for another bite of the serpent's apple. Its anti-creator enlightenment and the promise of immortality without God. Sounds familiar, right? On a vase depiction from, this is 450 BC, Nimrod/Heracles makes off with the apple as one of the Hesperides gestures for him to stay with them. And this is Nereus, or the Greek Noah. The Greeks knew exactly who Noah was. They call him Nereus, the wet one, the Hellas Guron, the salt sea old man. Above, we see three different depictions of Nereus from ancient Greek vases. On all three, he looks very old. He is seated as if on a throne, and he holds a scepter, a symbol of rule. The simple artistic communication. Here is the old man who ruled. Genesis 6:9 speaks highly of Noah's character. Noah is a just man, flawless, became he in his generations. With God walks Noah. The ancient Greek poet Hesiod says essentially the same thing about Nereus. But Pontos, the great sea, was father of truthful Nereus, who tells no lies. Eldest of his sons, they call him the old gentleman because he is trustworthy and gentle and never forgetful of what is right. But the thoughts of his mind are mild and righteous. Goes on to say, and remember this depiction of him holding that rod in his hand. Says, Nimrod Heracles usurps the authority of Noah Nereus. Nimrod Heracles begins his serpent and mankind exalting rebellion by nullifying the authority of Noah. The prophet of God who brought humanity through the flood had to be pushed out of the picture and his rule brought to an end. Above, on a red figure bobbing, Nimrod Heracles knocks Noah Nereus, who holds the scepter of rule, out of the way invalidating his authority and replacing it with his own. Heracles wears the lion's head and carries his club as signs of his great prowess. He forces Noah to drop the fish, a sign of his now disrupted authority in connection with the flood. So remember, the lion's head and the club, we're going to come back to this later to make a point. It says, after the flood, God instructed mankind to be fruitful and increase and fill the earth and subdue it. That's Genesis 9:1. That included subjecting every living animal of the earth, all of the fishes of the sea, and every flyer of the heavens. Greek art portrayed Heracles as the master hunter, doing exactly that in a post-flood world. First three labors of Hercules, and we heard about the labors of Hercules. I talked about this before, but these are the first three labors of Heracles. And the reason why Rome took over it and brought out Hercules is to cover the story up, because we see more of Hercules, the Roman side, than the Greek side, because we know of Hercules and not Heracles, but that's more Roman. But we know about the labors of Hercules. The first three labors of Nimrod, Heracles, reconstructed above by Holmes Bryant as they appear on the temple of Zeus at Olympia. Boasts of his conquest of the most powerful animals of the land, water, and air: the lion of Nemea, the fearsome hydra of Lima, and the vicious man-attacking bird of the lake, Symphalis. Athena accompanied him on all three of these labors, although the sculpture had no room for her in their depiction of him killing the water monster. So to me, clear as day, simple. You take the story from Genesis, take the story about Noah, take the story about Heracles, and then we know that the Romans took from the Greeks, and gave us Roman gods. And it's clear as day. They're telling you right here, well, wait a minute, this is where Rome got this figure from. The story predates anything biblical. We have the story. We know it predates anything biblical. So why is we believing this Noah story? And it's very simple. Nobody taught it to us. Very simple. Nobody taught us. The story's been here longer than the Bible. Nobody taught us. Nobody told us about the story. So if he was an ancient Greek scholar, this is why a lot of researchers and scholars don't believe in the Bible. They know where it came from. This is why I laugh at people who be talking shit, because I know you haven't done any real extensive research. And there's no way you can say the Bible predates this when we don't have one that predates it. When you have an actual Greek person who is responsible for giving us the Bible, we can see clearly where they got their stories from. We know where they got it from. They got it from their own mythology. Plain and simple. So it's not hard to put it together and see what took place. But this is one of the things that a few people are pointing out in their argument about the Bible. It also coincides with the Deucalion Fair flood story, which we have in Greek. Also, the Pandora's box, which we have in Greek. We have Hercules, and Samson. And it's not a coincidence that they put these two together in movies, telling you straight to your face what it is. So I know some people teeter-totter, some of you even teeter-totter with religion. You're seeing this stuff come to fruition as far as so-called Bible prophecy, but you're not understanding. You're not understanding, and then anything that comes up that looks biblical, that looks correct, people run back to the Bible. But it's clear as day where they got the stuff from. Clear as day. You can't find a story that predates this pottery. You take a look at this pottery. It's here. It exists. We have it. It's dated. It's agreed upon by all researchers. The dating is correct. Greece still exists. It still stands. You go over there and you will see this stuff. It's still there. When Frank Gaudio pulled that stuff out of the water, he pulled out a lot of this pottery. The artifacts that we need to prove what we're saying exist, they are real. When it comes to the Hebrews and their story, nothing. And what we do find is suspect. It looked like some stuff that anybody could have wrote on, and nobody agrees on it. It's not agreed upon by researchers. So understand how that works. Somebody finds it and says what they believes it to be. It is tested. And if everybody confirms the same thing, then boom, you have something that's proven. This is not the case with any artifact that's supposed to be pertaining to the biblical Jews. So the Greeks had their own plan, ready to come up with this whole story to put themselves in as being this people, until Rome came in and intervened. Now, I talked about Dr. Joseph Yehuda in the book Hebrew is Greek, and how he's clearly given us this understanding that, hey, the Arabic and the Hebrew language came from the Greeks. Now, this is the thing, because I know some of you did the research on this, and I know you ran into the problem that most of the Hebrews cite when it comes to Joseph Yehuda, not just him, the people of Greece who's trying to put this information out. So understand this. Let's make it real clear, real fast. Understand, this is what they believe. One, they believe that the Greeks created the Hebrew and Arabic language. What they also believe is it's some kind of conspiracy with these so-called Jews. And they, or a sect of Jews, which would be Greeks, basically piggyback off of Greek history to give us the Old Testament, and the New Testament. So they believe that this stuff happened. Oh, the Bible is real. This stuff is true. But these so-called Hebrews are lying about the Israelites, because they see what I just told you. They see that, well, wait a minute. During this time, our people was out conquering. So this can't be, you guys. You guys lied and put yourselves into our history. So this is what these people believe. This is what Joseph Yehuda believes, because you'll see a lot of the people who push his book, they're Christians. They believe in this stuff. And it's a big deal that they're trying to basically put, Greece on this high pedestal as being the creators of all this stuff. And they're overlooking a lot of things. So even though Joseph Yehuda's book, his book does go to helping us prove our point, it's still him basically trying to take credit for being the bloodline or the so-called true people, and that the story is basically made up, and we should look to Christianity to get the truth, because it's like, okay, well, the Old Testament is iffy. It's iffy. But if the New Testament is true and this whole thing is, with Jesus is real, then we have some type of holy connection to all of this that they should be given credit for, especially since you have the Septuagint written in Greek, and then you have the New Testament written in Greek in the beginning, and all this stuff being read in Greek over hundreds of years. So he's saying down here, he's talking about Hebrew letters along with their pronunciation. In Hebrew appears on the left, the equivalent Greek letters and their pronunciation in the middle, and the Arabic letter and pronunciation on the right. As already stated, the research of J. Yehuda restores part of a universal truth that has fallen unto oblivion for millennia. Not only is the Hebrew language Greek wearing a mask, in other words, a distorted version of Greek, but as we have announced at international conventions, there is no other language on the face of the earth except Greek. Now, let me jump in real quick so you can understand that clear, because I know what you're going to say. Well, wait a minute. What about Chinese? What about all these African languages? He's talking about far as like the Western languages, the established languages, the languages that we deal with the most. So during this time, this is what they know. They know about, the Indo-European languages, and they all stem with Greek. And that's basically a proven fact. You go back and look at these languages, Greek, as I showed you guys in That's Game when I was reading the Greek, and I said, hey, this is not an A, this is not an H. It's not what you think it is, because, English wasn't invented yet when those manuscripts were written. So clear as day, when we look at English, we can see that it comes from Greek. And then you start to go back and look, and you see that there's this connection. Because remember, we have what Cantonese, what they're speaking in China. It's a huge connection between the Chinese and the Greeks. We know, as I talked about, some deal had to be done between them and China. Huge connection with them. And then we start to look over and we seeing these similarities when you start comparing a lot of these languages, with Greek. And we're going to get into this later, not in this video, but in another video, because you have to look at that. And it was as if everybody, as I said, is in on whatever's going on. Plain and simple. So this is why he said that. But there is, it's debatable, and there is a lot of information to support what he's saying. Goes on to say, a few years ago, we made this statement at a convention of the Literary Society Parnassus titled The Ecumenical Character of the Greek Language, where we use text and images to prove this statement. All other languages are just descendants or distorted dialects of Greek, adopted by the peoples. Finally, we present one of the tables compiled by the undaunted scholar J Yehuda, where Hebrew letters along with their pronunciation in Hebrew appears on the left, the equivalent Greek letters and their pronunciation in the middle, and the Arabic letters and pronunciation on the right. And the preface just above the table shown below, Yehuda's first theorem is written, to wit, the Greek and Hebrew alphabets demonstrate striking similarities insofar as the order of the letters is concerned, their names, their shapes, and their pronunciations. In conclusion, Yehuda has scientifically proven that both Hebrew and Arabic are Greek in their origin, as is true with the other languages of the world. It is to be regretted that the speakers of this distorted Greek dialect do not take advantage of this so as to elevate themselves to free and Christ-loving Greeks. So you understand what I'm saying? These guys, they believe in the New Testament more so. As their compatriot, Yehuda has done. Many of them prefer to live in the dark. It is a fact that is to be pitied that some are fanatics who hate everything Greek, especially her history and her language. In the past, many such men appeared in the Roman state as politicians, academics, or administrators in the public sector and fought against everything that was Greek. Nowadays, such men cooperate with the global powers that are propelling the world towards destruction, a destruction that can only be avoided by a rebirth of the only salvation for humanity, Greek civilization. So, this dude is delusional in his conclusion, but he understands what he's saying as far as, this stuff being Greek in its origin. And he's scientifically proven, and I talked about that. This is one of the reasons why the book just fell off the face of the earth, because he proved it. Don't care what anybody who don't speak the languages say, and who hasn't read the book, or who hasn't done the history on it. He proves it 100%, and everybody agrees. Even if they don't want to talk about it or put it out there, of course they're not going to do that. Nobody's going to go against Rome and the Jews. It's just not going to happen. They're not going to lose everything. Whatever institution that you're working in, whatever situation that you're in, they probably own it. They probably own it. Probably own the bank, who has your house. They own, job, road, streets, so on and so forth. People understanding what's going on, and they don't want to lose their jobs, and they don't want to lose their life. Now, there's other ways to figure this thing out. And I talked about before, just looking at the history of the Greeks, and you can see they're clearly the Hebrews. So when you understand Greek customs, the culture, what they did back then, we find the same thing with the Jewish religion. So we know the Greeks did human sacrifices. They depicted it on the vases just like they did their mythology. Human sacrifices was accepted and allowed during Greek times with these Greeks. Sacrificed animals, they sacrificed on altars, burnt sacrifices, everything that we read about when it comes to this whole Moloch and what's happening with the Israelites, the Jews in the Bible. We see the Greeks already doing this stuff, but we go back and look at their history. So we know that it's this connection. We know it's this history that we can see with the Greeks and the crazy rituals that we find with the Jews. So what happens a lot of times is a lot of you guys send me videos on things pertaining to what I talk about. One of the videos that I had seen already, but somebody sent me, that was pertaining to Jeffrey Epstein and his whole situation, what happened with him. And a lot of people don't know about this whole thing. If you don't know about Jeffrey Epstein, go and Google him and look it up. We're going to get into it a little bit here. But you have to think about the allegations, because that's the crazy shit. Just the allegations of what they were saying this dude was doing on his island. So Epstein's island, supposedly child rape, child sex trafficking, human sacrifice, all kinds of crazy, sick shit. And he's a Jew, of course. Epstein. Steinstein, is Jewish. And everything that happened with him, and he was supposedly, keeping tabs on some of the elite and famous people that came onto his island. Basically, if you are named to be on his island, you are complicit in the murder and, rape of little kids, little boys and girls and women and, all kinds of crazy sick shit that's supposed to have happened on there. But when we get into the Jewish understanding of this, which we will in a second, you connect these dots. But then you have to look into the Bible, because the Bible makes it crazier. Because remember, in the Bible, you're Jewish. It's giving us the understanding that the Jews are allowed to do this. So if you remember, this is Deuteronomy 20, 13 and 14. It says, And when the Lord thy God hath delivered it into thy hands, thou shalt smite every male thereof with the edge of the sword. But the women and the little ones and the cattle and all that is in the city, even all the spoils thereof, thou shalt take unto thyself, and thou shalt eat the spoils of thine enemies, which the Lord thy God hath given thee. 21:11-14 says, and seeth among the captives a beautiful woman, and have a desire unto her, that thou wouldst have her as thy wife. Then thou shalt bring her home to thy house, and she shall shave her head and pare her nails, and she shall put the raiment of her captivity from off her, and shall remain in thine house, and bewail her father and her mother a full month. And after that thou shalt go in unto her, and be her husband, and she shall be thine wife. And it shall be, if thou have no delight in her, that thou shalt let her go, whether she will, but thou shalt not sell her at all for money. Thou shalt not make merchandise of her, because thou have humbled her. So what it's basically saying right here is, if during your pillaging, doing the stuff that you're doing, after you conquer, you see a woman that you want, you can take her. She's yours. And you basically talk her out of everything, and she has no choice but to conform to what you say and to be yours. But if you don't like her, you can't sell her. You got to let her go. You understand? It has to, well, if I like her, of course I'm going to take her. So if they see a girl that they like, they can take. So you have to understand how this goes into everything that we're seeing, and how this fits into this so-called, sex trafficking ring, when it's clearly just ritual sex trafficking. And these people doing exactly what the Bible says. It's going to make more sense in a second. But this is what they've been doing. So Epstein is involved because he's a Jew. This is what they believe. And what you're going to see in this video, what the Bible's saying, they're doing. And of course, remember Numbers 31, basically telling you can kidnap little girls, kill little boys, and do what you want with the little girls. So it's basically telling them they can take little girls. So we have been seeing this for a long time. We've been seeing this connection with the church, with these, religious people, and this child sex trafficking. That's stuff we see in the movies, the stuff we keep hearing about. And it's like, what the hell is this all about? What is going on here? It's something that, when you start to dig into and you trace it, you start tracing it back, it's going to go back to the Jews. Now, we're going to get into, at the end of this video, another connection. But remember, we're seeing this with the Jews. We're seeing this with the priesthood. We're seeing it with celebrities. We're seeing it with famous people, rich people. There's something that's going on. What is this about? Now, this is the Babylonian Talmud. And you can pause and read this for yourself, but I'm not going to read it. But it's basically talking about how they are allowed to basically have sex with little boys and little girls. How they are able to do sick shit, these Jews. So anybody who has went and studied it, and I showed you Babylonian Talmud, the folio it is, and you can go and take a look at it yourself and read through it and see, what they're allowed to do and why we are seeing these connections with this child sex stuff and everything that's been happening. Because if you understand everything we've been seeing for years, everything about child sex trafficking, everything we've been seeing about organ stealing is in there saying that they are allowed to do it. Understand, as I've talked about universal law and how it has to be, on par with what, is right. The crazy thing is, and this is how, you got to understand how this works. Now, why did Hitler hate the Jews? Right? Real quick. So remember, if you go back and look during that time, they are so good at hiding history. There was a huge situation where the Jews, everywhere they went, were proven to be frauds, scammers, shysters, so on and so forth. And everywhere they went, they would get kicked out. It was a big deal. Everybody understands this. So when the Jews were flourishing in Germany and doing what they was doing, Hitler was basically saying, they've been kicked out of everywhere they've been. It's their fault. These are the people who basically bringing down our civilization. They got to go. And what ensued. But if they don't tell you that history, that these people as a people have a history of going around the world and destroying the civilization they go into, taking over the banks, taking over the system. This is what they're known for. And they were kicked out of everywhere. You can go and look for yourself.